Hello, everyone. In Chapter 9, we discuss how to manage project risk caused by uncertainties. Please keep in mind that while we are reviewing these concepts in the context of a project, most of these concepts are applicable in dealing with uncertainty and risk in any other context that you face. Our learning objective for this chapter are to understand what risk is and how it relates to project management, identify the various types of risk and their impact on the project, and finally to learn the risk management techniques. The case study in this chapter is about Shake Shack that used crowdsourcing for thoroughly testing their mobile app before it was launched. The testing obviously resulted in a very robust app with which most users had pleasant experience. Furthermore, it was interesting that the app gave the impression to most customers that the food quality was also good. In addition to a good risk management technique, this is a example. This example points out the importance of the quality of the apps that an organization offers to its customers, how it impacts the public perception and the public image of that organization. Let's start by looking at the definition of risk, which is an uncertain future event, which if it happens, can impact the project positively or negatively. So our goal for risk management is to minimize the impact of negative risks while we are maximizing the impact of positive risks. When we are identifying risks that can impact our project, we need to consider potential sources of the risk. For example, when we use a new or unproven technology on our project, we most likely have some technical risks introduced in the project. Quality and performance risks come from quality issues, as we discussed in Chapter 8. Project management risks are introduced when we have poor project management processes, for example, poor schedule coordination or management. Organization risks can be introduced when priorities in organization change or when funding is not provided. External risks come from outside the project, such as regulations or natural disasters. Sometimes various risks can happen at the same time and augment the impact of the risks. For example, if we are dealing with a new technology and at the same time adequate resources are not provided to the project to deal with the potential setbacks from the new technology, that could have a great project as well as organizational risks. This slide is a list of common risks that IT projects face. We have seen similar lists in previous chapters, and you see several common threads such as top management commitment or failure to gain user acceptance, or the type of things that we see from many investigations and many lists. These are the processes involved in project risk management, which are like other project management processes. There's a lot of similarities here, and you will see. Starting with planning, how risk to be managed on projects, then identifying the risks from various sources, and performing qualitative and quantitative assessments of risk that we have identified. Then we need to plan how we respond to each risk. And finally, we implement the plan, the risk management plan, and monitor the risk throughout the project. In developing the risk management plan for a project, we got to make sure that we do involve key stakeholders whom were identified in our stakeholder analysis, as we have talked in the previous chapters. Having their buy-in of the risk management and their support of the risk management is extremely critical. These are the key elements included in a risk management plan. We need to establish the overall strategy for risk management based on the stakeholders' tolerance for risk. So your risk management for a given project may be very different in a risk-averse organization versus a risk-taker organization. We also lay out the methodology we will follow, the funding made available for risk management, the risk categories, definitions for what we consider major or minor risks, and etc. In identifying risk, we need to use various tools like brainstorming, checklists of risks for similar projects, and similar tools. There are a number of data analysis tools available, such as root cause analysis tool, which we studied and we reviewed in the last chapter. Another effective tool for risk identification is SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this analysis can be done for a project or an organization. Strengths and weaknesses are typically internal to the organization, where opportunities and threats are typically external factors. SWOT is an extremely effective tool to do a quick situational analysis in any setting. When we do the SWOT analysis for a project, issues that show on the list of strengths or opportunities or risks with positive impacts, while items in weaknesses and threats can help us identify risks with negative impact. Risk register is essentially the repository of all identified risks, their probability of occurrence, and potential impact on the project. Risk triggers is a terminology used for the events that serve as early warning for the risk. For example, when I worked in the federal government, if Congress did not pass a budget bill, the government then worked in what was called and what is called still continuing resolution, which means no new projects could get started. So an impasse on the budget was the trigger for the lack of funding risk that we had identified for many of our new projects. After we have identified the risks, we can uh, carry out qualitative or quantitative analysis. In performing qualitative risk analysis, we need to assess the impact of each risk if it occurs, and also estimate the probability of risk occurrence. We use this information to categorize risks. To categorize risks, we use a scoring uh, approach. An example of this is on this slide from PMI. So you can see that in this risk scoring approach, risks are categorized in four major categories: very high, uh, high, moderate, and low. And as you can see, they have different scores attached to uh, different categories. So, for example, if you have a risk with high impact and medium, low probability of occurrence, then the risk is categorized as high with a score of 60. When we identify a risk, we should consider various attributes of that risk so that we can properly plan for it. Issues that we need to consider are things like how can we detect the risk? How can it be managed or controlled? How urgent it would be when it occurs, etc. There are a number of ways that we can assess risk quantitatively. Let's look at a couple of these methods: sensitivity analysis or tornado diagram, and decision tree analysis. Tornado analysis or sensitivity analysis shows the sensitivity of a particular outcome of a project. In this example, it's net present value based on variance of particular assumptions or risks. In this example, we see that the discount rate has the most impact on the project net present value. Decision tree analysis is an effective way to make decisions based on the expected monetary value of different choices. In this example, we are trying to decide if it makes sense to build a new plant or upgrade an existing plant. If the demand is strong, which we estimate to be 65%, versus if the demand is weak, which we estimate to be to have a 35% chance. We need to calculate the monetary value of each branch. If we build a new plant, it will cost $120 million. If the demand is strong, we can make $200 million. So we will make net of $80 million in that scenario. However, if the demand is low, we can only make $90 million, meaning that we actually lose $30 million because we have spent $120 million to build the plant. So, considering that we give 65% chance to have a strong market and give 35% to have a weak market, then the expected monetary value is 65% times $80 million and 35% times the 30 million. So you add those up, the expected monetary value of building a new plant is $41.5 million. If we do the same analysis with the upgrade existing plant plant's branch, the EVM of that decision is $49 million. Therefore, the decision with more expected monetary value is actually upgrading the existing plant. The last step in planning is to decide what the contingent response to the risk needs to be. Basically, what do we need to do if the risk happens? There are 5 different responses we can have for any risk. We may avoid the risk completely by, for example, not using new technology on our project and therefore not having a technology risk. We can also transfer the risk to others through typically insurance contracts that we insure for that particular risk. We may reduce or eliminate the risk by taking mitigation measure. This is very common that if we know that there is a risk, we take measures to reduce the impact of that risk or the occurrence of that risk. For example, we can increase our cybersecurity testing to mitigate the security risks. We may also accept the risk in case it occurs. In fact, large organizations like the federal government or large corporations like Chevron accept many risks rather than transferring them to others or buy insurance for them. Because in the long term, being self-insured, if you can afford it, it is more cost effective. You may also escalate the risk so it can be perhaps covered by the organization rather than the project. There are a couple of other terms that you need to know. One is called residual risk. This is after we address the risk that is identified, there may be some remaining risk, and that's called residual risk. The other term is secondary risk, which is the risk that is introduced when we implement our response to the risk. So, like many other processes, we need to monitor risk throughout the project. Risk is something that the monitoring aspect of it is actually more important because risks do not stay the same throughout the project, so they actually need to be reviewed and updated throughout the project. While we are following our risk plan, we need to control the risk. For example, making sure through audits that all risk response measures are actually in place. So this concludes our discussion on risk management. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll see you later.